Welcome to In Conversation with Darrell Bricker. I'm your host, Sean Speer, editor-at-large at The Hub. I'm glad to be back in conversation with Darrell, the CEO of Ipsos Global Public Affairs, for another episode of our bi-weekly video and podcast series on the big developments and trends in Canadian politics. In today's episode, we have a lot to discuss, namely Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's announcement that he won't lead the Liberal Party into the next election and its implications for Canadian policy and politics. Darrell, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Sean.
Let's just start big picture, Darrell. Were you surprised with the Prime Minister's announcement, and what do you make of it?
No, I think he was pretty much foreshadowing that he was going to be doing something over the space of the Christmas holidays. And really, looking at the numbers, his political situation was untenable. As far as being somebody to lead the Liberal Party into the next election campaign, and what happened over the course of the holiday season was basically he didn't lose the Canadian population as much as he lost his own supporters. And it was really interesting when he gave his press conference. That's what he said.
Hmm.
He believed that he would still be a viable option for the Liberal Party in the next election campaign, although there was no evidence of that. But what he really did lament was the fact that he lost the support of the people who were around him. And I remember tweeting the day of, as a picture speaks 1,000 words, all of them synonyms for betrayal.
Hmm.
And you could really see that just even in his mood as he was standing at the podium.
Before we get into the consequences of his announcement and how it may manifest itself in a Liberal leadership race and, of course, in an eventual general election campaign, I have to ask, days after his announcement, how should we think about Justin Trudeau's legacy? How do you think it will ultimately be written?
Well, I put a little piece in the hub the other day
Thank you.
on just this, for me, any prime minister is really evaluated in their performance on three big questions.
Yes.
One of them is national unity. The other one is our relationship with the United States, and the third one is Canadian identity, creating a positive sense of what it is to be a Canadian. And I think on all three of those measures, we've really suffered under Justin Trudeau's leadership. On national unity, we've seen a rise in Western sovereignty activity, maybe not referenda, but we've got people in Western Canada considering things like ways to not participate in federal activities at a level that we've rarely seen in Canadian politics, even using the not threaten withstanding clause in the Constitution, or even threatening to use it. And October 26th, we're going to be experiencing a Quebec election in which the Parti Québécois is very likely to win re-election, and they promised that they are going to hold a referendum on sovereignty in their first term. So on something that has basically been dead under the prime ministership of Stephen Harper, and now finds its way back onto our national agenda. In terms of our relationship with the United States, need I say more? I mean, anybody who's watching this podcast knows what's been happening with Donald Trump over the last while. We're not in great shape there. And on the Canadian identity, the prime minister pronounced in 2015 we were going to be a post-national state, and if anything, we were going to regret our history and regret the country that we were part of. He never had a full-throated defense or statement about what Canada was going to be about, either to Canadians or to the world. And it should be no shock that our Canadian pride numbers, when we go out and ask people whether or not they're proud of being Canadian, are at the lowest level that we've ever had.
Mm.
So I think if those are the three questions that prime ministers are evaluated on over time, you really have to not be too optimistic about, at least in the short to medium term, how Justin Trudeau's stewardship of Canada is going to be perceived.
Another way in which political leaders are assessed is the position in which they leave their political parties. A poll a couple of days ago suggested that the core Liberal base is down to now something like 13% nationally. How should we understand the state of the Liberal Party? And maybe put it kind of bluntly to you, Darrell, who represents the median Liberal voter today? Who is that base?
Well, basically, there are people who are either nostalgic, so they are people who say that have been liberals for life, or they have a remembrance back to Justin Trudeau's father, or some sense of the Liberal brand as it was, the natural governing party of Canada through their history. So they tend to be older.
Yes.
interestingly enough, or they tend to be people who are vehemently opposed to Pierre Poilievre and what I like to call the 21st century conservatives, because they're not the progressive conservatives of the past. So they tend to be those people, but at the most, I mean, we put out a poll with Global today showing that the Liberals are down to 20. I
Wow.
mean, they got 18 under Michael Ignatieff back in 2011 when Stephen Harper won his majority. Basically, Justin Trudeau has returned them right back to the state that he was supposed to save them from. That's where we are today.
Someone said to me a bit tongue in cheek in the past couple of days that today the Liberal Party is left as the party of pronouns and the party of privilege. Is that a fair characterization in your mind?
Yeah, I think that the people who are kind of the official elements of the Liberal Party, the ones that have had the power in the Liberal Party over the last while, really bought into that post-national vision. And so it's about trendy identity politics and kind of therapeutic ways of looking at our history and trying to recover from the nation that we are as a settler culture as they claim that we are. They've been the people who've been prominent. There have been people who believe in the power of the central government to change things in the lives of Canadians, regardless of whether or not this coincided with what the provinces, who have a lot of the
Yes.
responsibility under our constitution, have a relationship to. They believe that climate change was the most important issue of our time, not claiming that it's not, but they believed it was more important than our national unity.
Yes. Yes.
So those are the people who've had the whip hand over the space of the last 10 years in the Liberal Party, and it's taken them right back to where they were under Michael Ignatieff. As far as privilege is concerned, that idea that there is the manly liberal or the blue liberal or whatever, they are kind of a unicorn political species like a red Tory. I don't know that they certainly exist. I mean, these are real people, but they don't really represent what I would call a viable voting bloc for the Liberal Party anymore. And really, I mean, the next leader of the Liberal Party really has to figure out who they are on a political spectrum in which the Laurentian consensus is basically evaporated, and we moved on to a new definition of Canadian identity and Canadian politics.
Well, in that vein, let me put a proposition to you and get you to respond. There was a sense in the aftermath of the 2011 election, as you say, a election in which the Liberal Party went to its lowest levels of public support in virtually all of Canadian history. People were writing possible obituaries for the party. There was talk, of course, about a possible merger. And along comes Justin Trudeau and breathes this new life into the party, takes it from third to first place in the 2015 election. And most of that talk in the aftermath of that election seemingly dissipated. As we look back over the past decade or so, is the Trudeau bump in 2015 an aberration? And that those questions that we were debating back in 2011, are they still operative? Is there a place in effect for the old style centrist Liberal Party in today's increasingly polarized political environment?
Not really. And the reason for that is because the way that Justin Trudeau won was not the way the Laurentian consensus strategy was. I mean, he should have done better in Quebec, and he
Yes.
should have been winning. It shouldn't have been winning in the car commuting suburbs of the places like the province of Ontario. That's how he formed his coalition. In some ways, I mean, one of the obituaries that was written was one that John Ibbitson and I wrote called the Big Shift. The truth is, when you take a look at
Which has come back in a roaring way in the past several years.
yeah, because if Pierre Poilievre wins the next election, he'll win it the way pretty much Stephen Harper won it,
Yes.
which is not a lot of support in the province of Quebec, but winning the car commuting suburbs of our bigger cities along with Western Canada. But the truth on Justin Trudeau, if we really go back and we take a look at those three elections, is the first election was really the only Liberal victory.
Yes.
I mean, and it didn't last long. By the end of 2017, going into 2018, we were already into SNC-Lavalin, and the Liberals never recovered. In 2019, after that, they basically had to govern essentially in coalition with the NDP. And certainly since 2021, they've had to do the same thing. So the idea that they formed some sort of national representative government didn't really happen in either of those other two elections. And as I said before, after 2 years after 2015, they they really, that proposition was gone. So I actually think that the extent of the bump that 2015 represented may be overstated when we look back at it over time.
Just to emphasize that point, in the 20 years since the 2004 election campaign, the Liberal Party has won the popular vote a single time
Yeah.
in several elections, which does suggest, Darrell, that though they're picking a new leader in the aftermath of Justin Trudeau's announcement, in a way, they ought to be asking themselves some more fundamental questions, as you put it, about what it means to be a liberal in the 21st century and what the Liberal Party's position is in our politics. Do you want to elaborate on your thinking on those fundamental questions?
That's a really interesting way of putting it, because when you go back and you watch the Prime Minister's press conference and in his announcement, he does talk about the Liberal Party, but he also talks an awful lot about progressive voters.
Yes.
And when he talks about how to oppose Pierre Poilievre in the next election campaign, he doesn't really put that on the shoulders of the Liberal Party. He puts it on the shoulders of progressive voters.
Yes.
So what's happening in Canadian politics is the Laurentian consensus way of winning election campaigns, which is basically sweeping Quebec and then picking up whatever you can in other places, and that forms a majority government, and a comfortable majority government, is becoming more a part of our history rather than a contemporary example of how to run a political strategy. So what Justin Trudeau is actually talking about is a more modern take on this,
Yes.
and I don't know that it's a Liberal Party take as much as it is a progressive voter take, and it's walking away from that middle of the road. As I said before, the unicorn strategy of red Tories that the late Hugh Segal would have been very representative of, or John Manley, the very much alive John Manley, would represent in the Liberal Party. They do exist; those people do exist, but they're not the animated part of the political conversation today.
My instinct is the same as yours, but then it prompts a question that has been a reoccurring theme over the course of our conversations these past several weeks, and that is, in a world in which the Liberal Party is committing itself to being, for all intents and purposes, a progressive party, what's the rationale for continuing a separate existence and a separate political identity from the New Democrats?
Well, and this raises the question that was up there after the 2011 election.
Precisely.
And I think it's going to become a very active conversation again, because even more now, the political dimensions are moving, and just not in Canada, I mean, globally.
Yes.
The story of the last 20 years of politics, particularly the last 10 years of politics, is not so much the rise of the extremes. I would say it's the dissolution of the center.
Yes.
And that's essentially what we're seeing everywhere. We're seeing it in the United States.
Yes.
We're seeing it in the UK. We're seeing it in France. We're seeing it in Italy. The extremes are taking up more of the energy in the political system, and that kind of technocratic, middle of the road, liberal democratic approach, the Pearsonian Laurentian consensus approach in Canada, that's the one that's going away. Just like the kind of the grand coalitions that you used to see in European politics, and the Northeastern Republicans and the business Democrats in the United States. I mean, these are things that are kind of going away.
Against that backdrop, Darrell, how should we think about the forthcoming Liberal leadership race? I hate to use these terms, but what are the different lanes, if I can put them that way, and where do you see the different candidates situating themselves?
Well, I think that there is a lane which is the let's continue with what we're doing lane.
Yes.
Somebody will try and probably do that with modification, the keeper of the flame.
Yes.
Somebody will try to do that. I think somebody will try to put a whole new set of ideas on the agenda that may coincide with some of the things that Justin Trudeau was trying to do, but bring more of a management expertise to how you execute it. I think that's a Mark Carney campaign. I mean, there's been a lot of musing about how we could have a sort of a climate change, national unity agenda and all that kind of thing that we've seen come out from people who are talking, I don't know necessarily on behalf of Mark Carney, but certainly would be familiar with his work and with his thinking and the things that he's talking about, that he may try to try to go with. I wish him the very best of British luck with that one, because it's really one of the things that has caused the situation that we're in today for the Liberal Party. And then there's probably somebody who is going to try and go back to that more traditionalist type of a liberal approach, who we are, the Laurentian consensus maybe sort of way of doing things. But there really isn't a lot of new space, I would say, for any of these candidates to work out in a very, very short period of time. I think what you're going to see is I'm trying to read a logic into this, and anybody who's listening to this, what I probably said doesn't sound very logical, and you would be right to say that. But I think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of improvisation. Everything right now and what's happening with the Liberal Party and with the government of Canada looks like complete improvisation. And to assign it any sort of ideological dimension or well thought through plan or anything, I think would be giving it too much credit.
Yeah, I suspect you get a lot of agreement from our listeners and viewers on that point. Put yourself in the shoes of Pierre Poilievre. I recognize it's early days, but from the perspective of the Conservative Party, which of course has a commanding lead at this stage, is there a candidate that you might want to face, or one that you might be more concerned about facing?
I don't think he would. The only ones that he would be concerned about facing are probably ones that aren't obvious. So somebody came in from outside who is sort of a person who could take on the personification of the traditional Liberal brand and really is a compelling personality. Because what we do know about progressive voters is the left needs to love. So somebody that the left can fall in love with, the way that they fell in love with Justin Trudeau, or in the United States they fell in love with Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, or in the UK Tony Blair. People who are those very motivational types of leaders. But I don't see any on the current docket of people who are talking about being leaders. I think that the two easiest for him to run against, honestly, would be Chrystia Freeland, because it's so easy to reattach her to whatever Justin Trudeau was up to. I mean, she's so closely aligned to what was going on. And then Mark Carney, who comes across to me like somebody who back in 1960 around Lester Pearson would have been the ideal type of person to take on a senior role in government and maybe even prime minister, just like Lester Pearson did. But in an era in which populism and creating a kind of a very lovable persona with an inspirational persona with the public, he may have all the smarts, but that's not necessarily what really works in politics these days. It's not the LSATs. It's somebody who can really communicate effectively and connect with people. And maybe he has those skills, but we haven't seen them in action yet.
Not only will the ultimate leader and in turn prime minister have to contend with the public's ill feelings towards the Trudeau government and its record, he or she may also have to contend with the public's unhappiness about how this whole situation has played out. The fact that the party, for all intents and purposes, has turned inward at the precise moment, that there's a growing sense that we need a government capable of defending and advancing Canadian interests vis-a-vis the United States. Maybe just to put it directly to you, how much will the party face public aversion as a result of the way that the Prime Minister has resigned, and how this leadership itself will play out?
Yeah, I think that there's all sorts of opportunity for this to just descend into a demolition derby. I mean, the rules are unclear, the candidates are unclear, how you separate yourself from the previous administration if you're a sitting cabinet minister in the space of, just a few weeks. How do you articulate a new vision for the country? It's very difficult to see how this comes out well for anybody. And not only that, by intention, when Justin Trudeau came in as the leader of the Liberal Party that he became the leader of, and then the Prime Minister of Canada, he basically set up the destruction of everything that was that previous identification of the Liberal Party, other than maybe the color of the brand, to create a very personal version of what being a Liberal was, and it was a Justin Trudeau Liberal. Well, what is the Liberal Party 10 years after?
Yes.
under that kind of a definition. And somebody else has to say, no, 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 we're not that. We're this thing that you're supposed to remember from 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 50 years ago. The task is incredibly daunting against a candidate who has set himself up as the personification of change on the ballot and has done an excellent job of doing that. Whether you like him or you don't, he is the person who's change on the ballot. He's incredibly well funded. He's focused, and he's showing himself up to be an excellent campaigner. So, you know, you've got that, and then you've got this demolition derby on the other side as they try to sort out who they are and who's going to represent them. It's a very difficult campaign for the Liberal Party. I must tell you, as somebody who's in the business of measuring
Yes.
what's going on in federal politics, what I worry about in terms of polling right now is trying to capture what the floor is for the Liberals. Because I keep getting asked that question, what the core is or the floor is. I'm not sure.
Wow.
I'm just not sure.
If you'll indulge me, I'd like to speculate a bit about the future.
And I haven't.
One of the operating assumptions is so much of public commentary in the past few days is that the coming months will play out as expected. The Liberal Party will ultimately select a leader in a process that may or may not be the subject of some scrutiny. He or she will then become the prime minister and constitute a government, deliver a speech from the throne, and soon thereafter fall to a vote of non-confidence and will be precipitated into an election. But what about some alternative scenarios? You know, one that I've heard in recent days and that we intend to explore in greater detail, both as a matter of legality and politics at the Hub, is the prospect of the fixed election date itself. There are open questions about whether the law is directory or mandatory, whether it could be simply ignored or amended, in which case a government could persist beyond October 2025, ostensibly with the hope of producing positive outcomes for Canadians and creating a higher probability that the Conservatives themselves create some sort of gaffe that creates the conditions for the party to outperform where they currently find themselves. Recognizing that's involves a whole lot of assumptions, what do you think the politics of something like that might be in a context in which Canadians really seemingly do want the opportunity to express themselves in a change election?
Well, I think your last point is the operative one, which is Canadians. I mean, 81% of Canadians believe that Justin Trudeau did the right thing quitting. 78% are demanding a change in government.
Wow.
I mean, at some point, the pitchforks will come out and the torches will get lit. I mean, we're not France. I mean, obviously, they'd be doing things in a different way if we were in France, but at some point, it just becomes completely untenable. And we'll see how that all transpires. But I think it's equally likely that the Liberals could not even return to the House, that they could just call an election and try and, you know, get the Tories on the wrong foot and try to steal a bit of a march or do something. I mean, I think that's more probable than them trying to last till the end of October. I mean, basically, you know, they can try and govern for longer, but it turns then into the limbo dance of support for. I mean, do we go from 20 where they are today, and there's polls that have had them lower, down to 2? I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a great outcome for them.
In light of everything you've set out so far in a conversation, it prompts the question in my mind, why would anybody want this job?
Well, Sean, you've worked in politics. I've worked around politics for a lot too. Everybody thinks that they can be the one, right?
Mm.
That's all about everybody else. But even Justin Trudeau, you know, I go to a certain place, and, you know, granted, it didn't take place when he was on, Ski Hill in BC, when people, at least one person, was yelling at him to go. But, you know, the guy was a celebrity and people responded really well to him, and he couldn't see that the vast majority of the population felt completely differently than the people who wanted to take selfies with him. And, this is one of the problems that exists for politicians. How do you stay grounded in a world that, in an environment that doesn't allow you to be grounded? I mean, one of the issues that we have in Ottawa is not the real world.
Yes.
It's a 100% consumed by one topic. It's a one industry town. And you're surrounded by people who believe what you say. They nod their heads and they say you're correct. You can get up into, in the PMO, the old Langevin block, and on the second floor there, and you can have people sit around and say, hey, we should come up with a constitutional amendment that we'll announce at a debate. And that's a great political strategy. Or, hey, maybe we should call the Gomery inquiry, or hey, I'm sure they're doing the same thing around Justin Trudeau and some of the things that he's done. I mean, there are always people who can get sucked into that and see themselves differently. There are people who have a bit of a messianic kind of a view too, that they, that they will really be able to engage with Canadians. And in spite of everything in Ottawa, they really understand what people want, and they're the person who can articulate it. There are some people who think that there's the logic of what they have to propose is so compelling that how can anybody possibly disagree with them? By the way, I think that that's a fairly emblematic of some of the people who are around Justin Trudeau in the early days. It was, I'm going to tell you the way that things should be, and I'm going to keep telling you if you disagree with me, you're either stupid or you're malevolent, right?
Yes.
You could never understand that somebody else could have another point of view. And those people are out there too.
Let me put a penultimate question to you. I can't let you go without asking a question about Donald Trump's ongoing provocations and what they may mean for the public mood and how the Canadian public comes to think about either the Liberal Party and its eventual new leader, or how Pierre Poilievre may represent the country vis-a-vis the United States. What to make of what seems to be an escalating set of provocations, and how do you think they may influence the Canadian political landscape?
Well, for the Liberal Party, I think what it's going to do, normally what it should do for a sitting prime minister is create a rally to the flag
Yes.
type of a situation. We're not seeing that with this prime minister. People want to see the back of him. Maybe there's a new leader from the Liberal Party who can emerge that can create that sort of thing. It's not obvious at the moment who that would be. But the other thing that it's going to do is change the agenda that Pierre Poilievre thinks he's running on.
Interesting. Go on.
Because sure, it's about the carbon tax. Sure, it's about the gatekeepers. Yes, it's about building houses. But I think that what you're going to see is the issue of Canada's position in North America and a combination of our economic viability in North America, but also our identity as something unique, as George Grant called us, a unique species in the North American continent. Canadians are going to be looking for somebody who can articulate that and bring it together and stand behind it and represent the country relative to somebody who's starting to sound like, President Madison just before the start of the War of 1812, where taking Canada as a mere matter of marching, right? They're going to look for somebody who's able to rally our sense of togetherness. And if the Liberal Party can't do that, these are the issues that are going to fall directly on the desk of Pierre Poilievre. And he hasn't got a hand signal for that one, right? This is changing very rapidly under our feet. And we're going to see whether he's a nimble politician and whether he can adjust himself to the issues agenda that's going to be emerging, that's not in his control, that's going to be pushed on us by external events.
It's a great segue to my final question. The Conservatives for the past 2 years or longer have been prosecuting a successful case against Prime Minister Trudeau. With him out of the picture and some of the other issues swirling around them, what should they be doing over the coming weeks to prepare for a new political opponent and, in turn, a slightly different or possibly considerably different political environment?
Well, the first thing is you're winning by 26, relax, right? You're doing a lot of the right things already. And what got you here is going to keep you going. So they've got the biggest issues that Canadians care the most about. They're just like Donald Trump was in the US, they're ahead on them. So, don't pay attention to the media. Don't, stay off of social media. Don't be distracted. Big game hunters, as John Diefenbaker said, don't get distracted by rabbit tracks. So there's going to be a lot of rabbit tracks that come out of what's going on in the Liberal convention and all the rest of it. I think the bigger question that is going to be confronting the Conservatives is, what are you going to do when the agenda starts to change under your feet? And where do you stand on some of these bigger existential questions? Most importantly, Canada's relationship with the United States. Where do you stand on that? And at this point, Pierre Poilievre, other than saying that we're not for sale and we're not going to be part of the United States, hasn't really articulated what his position is going to be when he starts to get called Governor Poilievre.
That's a good place to wrap up what's been a pretty wide-ranging conversation, a lot of big issues and questions. Darrell, I want to thank you for joining me, and I look forward to catching up in a couple of weeks.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Really appreciate it.